Well, budgetary issues are becoming kind of the driving issues at the Idaho State Capitol. And we're going to talk a little bit about a couple of different efforts to protect the taxpayers, to preserve transparency and accountability in government that have been, or they either have been or are in the process of being turned on their heads by people who feel that it's in our best interest to continue to grow government, including its costs, including what it will take to keep the taxpayers, contributing to their pet projects. So we'll talk a little bit about that. We're going to spend a little bit of time talking about not just the budget problems, but who it is who lines up. Because you will find that the people who are most connected to the Idaho Association for Commerce and Industry, or IACI, seem to have perfect scores when it comes to to how they cast their votes, at least according to IACI. Care to guess who the big spenders are? We'll talk a little bit too about the question that every one of us has to ask ourselves that determines whether or not we're actually a good person or whether we can just ignore what's going on around us. Let's get the show started.
Reporters are biased, the Idaho Press Club are biased, all media, newspaper, radio.
To be completely blunt here, Brian, and there are plans to expand
indoctrination.
That's right.
Well, Idahoans are also concerned.
Horror shot. That line would be moving a little bit farther west.
I'm like crying.
Nobody wants to see
dark money is influencing policy in our state.
Well, that's not how this works.
So again, welcome to Nowhere to Hide. We're talking about budgetary battles today. And we're going to start with a budgetary battle that sadly, it looks like is over, at least for this legislative session. Kudos to Brian Allman and Gem State Chronicle for pointing out this story yesterday. Welfare is at critical mass. What is he talking about? Well, specifically, there is a bill that was introduced. This was House Bill 419. Representative Jordan Redmond presented that bill to the Health and Welfare Committee. Now, that bill would put specific measurable guardrails on Medicaid expansion, which voters approved in 2018, that if not met, would withdraw Idaho from the program, rather. I believe they were calling this, it would trigger withdrawal from the program. But for several hours, Brian reports, representatives of the healthcare industry joined with people who depend on Medicaid to pay their bills, all testifying against the measure. In the end, the committee voted 8-5 to hold the bill, effectively killing any hope of Medicaid reform for this year. 5 Republicans and 3 Democrats agreed that Medicaid expansion has become too essential for too many people to risk putting any conditions on its future. Think about what that says. Brian asks, how did we get to the point where even Republican legislators are unwilling to countenance changes to a massive entitlement program with skyrocketing costs? That's a fair question, by the way. I don't think he's playing dirty by asking that. At one point, maybe it was doing some good, but is there a point where it's no longer going to be affordable? Now, I wanted to show you, too. This was Ilana Rubel. Wonderful, very, very kind woman, but I don't think she believes the sun would rise in the morning if it weren't for the blessings of government, making it possible. So Ilana Rubel said, I got the numbers up on H419, repeal of Medicaid expansion from the hearing this morning. 8 signed up to testify in favor of the bill, 407 against. Obviously very well organized in their opposition. Stunning ratio. Good job showing up, advocates. As Brian points out, it turns out people who receive government benefits really like those government benefits. So sadly, that particular bill appears to be, done, at least for now. I'm sure there will be some better post-mortem examination coming out from the Idaho Freedom Foundation. But let's talk about another budgetary issue, and that is transparency. I know that this sounds like, this is just the realm of conspiracies, but the more you look at the way that the budget process has been carried out and continues to be carried out in some instances, the more clear it is that there are certain favored or protected interests who, by virtue of their chummy relationship with various political action committees or even various candidates or office holders, have a favored status that they need to maintain, and that means that the taxpayer dollars have to flow freely. In other words, distinguishing between what would be nice to have and, we absolutely have to have that, becomes much more negotiable when there are political favors attached. Let's take a look at this article from the Idaho Capital Sun. Idaho Governor Brad Little says JFAC's budget changes could have unintended consequences. Now, this is in relation to changes which were implemented to give legislators more scrutiny, in other words, more transparency, more accountability on the part of how spending requests from all departments are handled. So we'll start with the mainstream approach here. This is the official, version, which gives as much benefit of doubt as possible to the state and to the spending. So the article tells us on January 6th, JFAC approved bare bones maintenance of current operations budgets designed to keep the lights on next year for state agencies. Now, those maintenance budgets are basically a version of last year's budgets put forward for next year with all of the one-time funding removed. In other words, this is what it takes to operate these departments. The maintenance budgets reduce state general fund spending for the next year by $46.6 million compared to the original budget JFAC sent last year. I know some people are already screaming, how could they cut it to the bone? But listen to the process and why this was implemented in the first place. In an interview Tuesday at the Idaho State Capitol, Senator Scott Herndon of Sagal says he joins many of his constituents and fellow Freedom Caucus members in the Idaho legislature in supporting these changes on JFAC. Citing a presentation from the Legislative Service Office Budget and Policy Division Manager Keith Bybee, Herndon told The Sun that JFAC only used to analyze about 19% of state spending. Meanwhile, Herndon said government spending grew by 54% just between 2020 and 2024. JFAC's new changes, from working groups to the maintenance budgets to the base budget deep dives, gives legislators more ability to scrutinize the budget and to zero in on new funding requests and line items. Now, I know the popular way to portray this, at least on the part of their political opponents and those, again, who really benefit from these government benefits, is, this is heartless, this is terrible, they just want to take money away from people who deserve it. But there's more to this. Again, it comes down to breaking down, is it something that we absolutely need versus something that we would really like to have? And I'm sorry, but that's one of the reasons we elect people into our legislature, to make those kinds of decisions about whether taxpayer money is being spent and accountable, to the taxpayers, correctly. Herndon told The Sun he thinks the dust up over JFAC's rules and voting is just a distraction. Herndon said the rules and voting procedures work because JFAC used them to set the entire state budget last year. If it isn't about rehashing rules and procedural debates, Herndon said the real reason might be because somebody's worried their budget won't pass or worried that their line items will get shot down. So let's take a little bit closer look. This is actually from Senator Herndon himself, but here is a chart that illustrates that 54% increase just in the last 4 years in Idaho state spending. I mean, on the one hand, some people are probably like, this is cool, we can do even better. But for the taxpayers who are already paying more for everything at the gas pump and at the grocery store, maybe it's time to start looking at some real responsibility here. Senator Herndon says, here's a stunning statistic. In previous years, the Idaho legislature reviewed just 19% of the total spending. Now, your legislature, he reminds us, has routinely approved $10 billion budgets while not even reviewing 81% of those expenditures. Think about what that looks like. That spending would continue to roll over year after year and never get a review by the legislature. So Scott Herndon says now people admit that the process of legislative review for the approval of budgets each year has been profoundly shallow and amounts to little more than rubber stamping. Now, that's less a criticism of the people involved than it is a criticism of the process. Nonetheless, Chuck Winder took extreme exception to Senator Herndon pointing this out. In fact, removing him from one of his chairmanship assignments. That's how extreme he took offense. So Senator Herndon says, well, the good news remains the changes made in JFAC's budgeting procedures, and he walks through in this article through a whole bunch of different scenarios and explains the different types of spending. It's very detailed, but if you really want to understand the process, it's worth it. You can go to trueidahonews.com to learn more about this. Now, he says, the good news remains that with the changes made in JFAC's budgeting procedures this year, much of this will be more visible than in previous years. Now, the budgeting process will be more transparent and proceed throughout the session in manageable, bite-sized chunks. He says we'll probably set spending levels more conservatively. Now, he points out how in the old way of doing business, he discovered that the Idaho Senate has not killed a budget bill on the Senate floor since 2019. That was 5 years ago. So he says, I think we will get better budget bills out of JFAC this year. I also think that all senators will be better able to identify problems in the spending bills on the floor and more informed to send them back to JFAC for more work if it's needed. I don't know about you, but I'm grateful there are actually legislators who think about this kind of stuff. Senator Herndon says it's encouraging to see Idaho's budget process undergo this transformation, which will bring about increased transparency and accountability. Through these changes, Idaho is poised for a more informed and accountable approach to budgeting, paving the way for a fiscally responsible future. Stay tuned as we continue to report on this new budget process. Now, here's the problem. It's very well intended, but Republican leadership in the Senate has moved to shut down that effort and, in fact, to take over the process and to add in spending that was stripped out. And essentially, they are doing an end run around those reforms to make sure that the money will continue to flow as it has previously. Now, a number of people have been calling this out. Brian Allman among them. It looks like Republicans Burtonshaw, Cook, Lent, Van Orden, Bundy, Raybould, Furness, Handy, and Petsky teamed with Democrats Ward, Engelking, and Just to try to undo JFAC's new transparent budgeting process. And that's exactly what they're trying to do. Got to keep those benefits flowing, to those, friends of the governor. Representative Heather Scott actually put it this way. Here's a summary of what's happening with your money in Idaho. The conservatives did a lot of work last year revising the state budgeting process to separate necessary versus nice to have line items. This is what takes place in the JFAC, or Joint Finance Appropriations Committee. But the IACI Uniparty and their lackeys in the legislature realized that they couldn't sneak in special interest dollars. So they're ripping apart all the hard work we did to increase transparency. They want to go back to combined budgets which don't separate necessary from unnecessary funds. That's what's at stake right now. By the way, thanks to Gem State Brian Lenny, and Stop Idaho Rhinos for all the good reporting on this. Do you understand why it's making more sense than ever that there are those who want to muddy up our election process, make it easier to elect so-called common sense Main Street Republicans that are really nothing more than Democrats wearing Republican clothing? They grow government, they grow the spending, and when barriers, reasonable barriers that provide accountability to the taxpayer and transparency to the taxpayer, when those things come up, they want to tear them down. Isn't it funny? Because it's some of the same people who are very concerned about, well, now, we don't want to have school choice. Where would the accountability come from with these private schools? Not realizing that the moving your child to a private school, that is the accountability. You take them where you feel like you are going to get the most likely result that you're looking for. Nonetheless, here it is when there's accountability needed in government, where it's desperately needed. Oh, we have to blunt that and make sure it's not too accountable. Can they really have it both ways? I suppose they can, but it's still disgusting to see. I do appreciate those in the meme world for keeping us supplied with thought-provoking and, yes, even informative imagery such as this. Keeping government growing, Democrats and the Idaho Main Street Caucus, they really do work together. Voters need to figure that out. Senator Brian Lenny says today Democrats in the Idaho Main Street Caucus members, who a study by Legal Analysis labels as philosophically Democrats on the JFAC committee, are perfectly aligned. And he points out remarkably, all of them boast 100% IACI scores. What a coincidence. Isn't that great how that worked out? Their goal is to dismantle the Budget Committee's hard-won progress in enhancing transparency and reining in government growth. Now, I'm going to shift gears here for just a moment, and this is going to put some responsibility on folks like you and me. Okay, we may want to dismiss our own sense of, well, how can I really move the needle here? Well, first of all, you can know what's going on in the process, but you can also understand that you are not getting factual information. And I'm pointing out Dr. Drew Pinsky here. He had a personal awakening. Now, he actually credits RFK Jr., which I don't have a problem with that. But listen to his conclusion. He says, I've realized everything in the news is BS. Everything. There's nothing I can consume on legacy media that I can trust. And that is shocking. It makes you wonder how long it's been going on. I didn't realize how much speech was being suppressed. Why share that with you? Because legacy media isn't going to tell you, what you can do to make sure that your government is operating in your interest and being accountable and transparent in regards to how it spends your money. Wouldn't it be nice to know that you could actually trust that information? And I say this with the understanding there are grassroots journalists in Idaho who are making a wonderful difference. It's fun to see the legacy press look down their noses. Who do these people think they are? What's their certification? Are they even qualified? Yeah, to tell the truth? Absolutely. In fact, that's the scariest part of all, I guess, to the legacy media. We're all qualified to tell the truth. Now, some people have found organized ways to get that information out there. I had to laugh because I saw a fact checker today. Well, we rate this independent news source as mostly right-wing and always wrong. And it's like, maybe people aren't actually waiting for your permission to check out a resource. There's another issue here, and this is the one that really is, this one may actually, cause you a little bit of heartburn. My apologies if it does, but it's a question we need to ask ourselves. This comes to us courtesy of Michael Herman from his Substack. What can we do? How do good people take action? Now, I'm going to preface what I'm about to share with you with the understanding that there are those who maintain that, well, all of these, bills that deal with culture war issues, whether it's, LGBTQ how-to books teaching kids, how to participate in various forms of sexual exploration and whatnot, whether it's drag queen story or whether it's gender dysphoria, there's a very real problem. And the people who aren't getting on board, and I'm talking normal people like you and me who just won't embrace the woke agenda, are labeled as extremists and dangerous, to everybody else. But if you know that there is some serious harm going on, at what point is it your obligation to say something? Okay, that's the unpopular part. Who wants to be the bad conscience? Nobody that I know of. Michael says, all my life I've heard in reference to the Holocaust and the German people of the time, how could good men and women stand by as these atrocities took place and do nothing? And he says, and then I see this entire transgender movement, this whole body dysphoria movement take place all around us today, mutilating children and minors. As we all sit silently by witnessing an entire industry created that butchers children in sexual transition surgeries. And I say, I wonder if people understand now about all those Germans. Now, he says, from what I understand, over the past 20 years, we have gone from very, very few hospitals doing surgery on underage minors to alter their sexual orientation to 160 hospitals participating nationwide today. There are doctors and nurses, sworn medical professionals to the Hippocratic Oath of physician do no harm, that are today, every day, going to work and mutilating underage children, doing irreparable harm and collecting a check, providing children as young as 11 or 12 puberty blockers and medications designed to forever alter their God-given hormones and human genetics. And they do this for pay. This is how they make a living. This is their calling by their own choice. But he says, you and I, we go on with our lives. We do nothing to stop this. Are you a good man or woman? By the way, I thought this was a particularly poignant way to illustrate how this tragic issue is approached by much of the medical industry. Pinocchio says, I want to be a real boy. And this time the Blue Fairy says, do you have insurance? What? It's sad, but there's money to be made. And there are people who, you only have to sell your soul once, but to sell it in a buyer's market? Really? Michael Herman says, right now it appears that a system has grown absent protocols, absent any hurdles. A student at school claims they are the opposite gender, and suddenly teachers are referring to them by a chosen opposite sex name. They are not including parents in the child's request and decision. They begin to assist the child, independent of parental involvement, to help the child in the transition process. Now, in a recent case in Montana, Child Protective Services stepped into a situation and removed the child from parental care. Now, Michael Herman says in that particular incident, there'd been a divorce when the child was young. The parents claimed the child has a history of attention seeking, yet now the child is in the custody of CPS and being transitioned absent parental involvement. And his point is, he says, I find all of this more than a little disturbing. I find it reprehensible. There appears to be no collective protocols or rules or regulations for governing any aspect of this entire life-altering process. Now, I don't think he's necessarily making the case, we need more government to solve this problem. But does he not point out that there is a legitimate problem, like a legitimate atrocity that's being carried out in the name of, it's good, it's healing, it's affirming kind of care? And people sit by, they don't want to criticize. can I be very honest? I believe this is one of the reasons why St. Luke's went after Ammon Bundy so viciously, because he was calling them out on making money from things that ethically maybe healthcare shouldn't be making money on. Anyway, we have a choice to make, each one of us. Will I be a good man or a woman? And maybe the other question, the corollary that follows along with this is, how long can I keep doing bad things or going along with bad things and still be a good person? Okay, I can't answer that question for you. Only you can answer it. But it's one that that's a conversation each one of us really needs to be having at some level. I'm Brian Hyde, and this is Nowhere to Hide.
Reporters are biased, the Idaho Press Club are biased, all media, newspaper, radio.
To be completely blunt here, Brian, and there are plans to expand
indoctrination.
That's right.
Idahoans are also concerned.
Horror shot. That line would be moving a little bit farther west.
I'm like crying.
Nobody wants to see.
Dark money is influencing policy in our state.
Well, that's not how this works.